Before Caspar Glattfelder ever set out for America, his older brother tried to go first. His name was John Peter. He died in the spring of 1742, before the party had even crossed the Swiss border, and a whole branch of this family came from him anyway.
From the Caspar Glattfelder Association of America, this is the Glattfelder Gazette. Season 1, Episode 5.
John Peter is the reason thousands of people in this family today carry a name you might not recognize. He was born in 1700, 9 years ahead of Caspar. By 1742, he had made the decision that would later define his younger brother's life. He was going to take his wife and his 6 children and leave Glattfelden for Pennsylvania. He packed up, said his goodbyes, and started out. And he did not get far. John Peter died before the party had even crossed the Swiss border. The parish register at Glattfelden sets the date at April 21st. His family turned around, carried his body back to the town he had been trying to leave, and buried him at home. His widow was left in an impossible position. Her husband had committed the family to a future 3,000 miles away, sold or settled whatever could be turned loose, set the whole household pointing west, and then died at the very start of the road. She had 6 children, the youngest barely 2 years old, and she and John Peter had been married 21 years. Now she faced the Atlantic as a widow, with those 6 to keep alive and no husband to share the weight of getting them across. The dream had been his. The grief and the debt and the 6 children were now hers alone, in a country she may already have given up her footing in. Her name was Salomea. Before her marriage in 1721, she had been Salomea Amberg. And after April of 1742, she was a widow with a decision in front of her that no one would have faulted her for refusing. She could stay. She could fold the whole plan up with her husband's things and remain in Glattfelden, where she knew the language and the lanes, and where her husband now lay in the churchyard. Instead, a year later, when Caspar and Elizabeth and the rest of the Glattfelden families made ready to leave in the spring of 1743, Salomea gathered her 6 children, Elizabeth, Barbara, Felix, Rudolph, Magdalena, and little Caspar, the youngest at not quite 2, and went with them. She carried her dead husband's plan across the ocean on her own. We do not know what it cost her because we do not know what became of her. This is one of the honest gaps in the family record, and it is worth naming plainly. Salomea may have died on the crossing the way Caspar's wife and infant son did. She may have reached Pennsylvania and lived on quietly for years. The one real clue is a kind of silence. Beginning in 1750, more than a dozen of her grandchildren were baptized in the churches of York County, and in those days a grandmother in good health was the natural choice to stand as godmother at least a few times. It was an honor and a duty, and families took it seriously. Salomea's name never appears on any of those baptisms. The plainest reading of that absence is the hard one, that she did not long outlive the journey her husband had died trying to make. She got his children to America. Whether she lived to watch them grow up in it, the record will not say. The records play one last strange trick on John Peter. When the Glattfelden pastor drew up his official list of the parish's emigrants in 1744, he wrote John Peter's name among the people who had left for America in 1743, as though the man had made the crossing after all. He had not. The parish's own death register, kept in the same church, gave the true date, April 21st, 1742. Even the paperwork seemed to want him to have reached the New World. The children, the record does follow, and this is where John Peter's story stops being only sad and becomes something larger. At least 4 of his 6 children left clear tracks in America, and the tracks run south. His daughter Elizabeth married a man named Jacob Rain in 1750. Rain took up a small piece of land near Schuster's Church and paid taxes in Shrewsbury Township for a few years, and then he and Elizabeth carried their family down to North Carolina, where he eventually called himself a resident of Lincoln County. His daughter, Barbara, married John Hildebrand, who had settled on land just south and east of Casper along the Codorus. And there the two of them raised a large family within sight of her uncle's farm. His son Felix married Sarah Meyer the same year as his cousin Elizabeth married Rain, and before long Felix too pulled up and went south into Rowan County, North Carolina, where he and Sarah lie buried in a country churchyard that is now in Davidson County. Another son, Rudolph, married in Lancaster County when he was already in his middle 30s, then moved on into western Virginia and finally North Carolina, where he died around 1804. Two of the six, Magdalena and the youngest Casper, leave no clear trace in America at all. Whether they died young or simply slipped out of the records the way so many did, no one can now say. They are part of the cost of John Peter's journey that never made it into any ledger. Those 4 journeys share one direction. John Peter's children scattered into the Carolina and Virginia backcountry, far from the York County hills where Casper's sons dug in and stayed. They married, they raised families, and across the generations the name traveled and shifted in their mouths the way it shifted in everyone's. The Glattfelder name was never a stable thing on paper. Clerks and stonecutters wrote it the way it sounded to them, and over the centuries it broke into Glattfelter, Gladfelter, Glottfelty, and more. In the mouths of John Peter's southern descendants, it settled finally into Clodfelter. By the time those families had been Southerners for 100 years, most of them no longer knew the name had ever been anything else, or that it ran back through a young widow and her 6 children to a man who died in 1742 without ever leaving Switzerland. That connection stayed hidden for a long time, and for years nobody could prove it. When this family began holding reunions in the early 1900s and digging hard into its own past, the CLOD Felters of North Carolina were a standing puzzle, a large group that carried Swiss features and a battered version of the family name but could not be fit into the tree. It took patient years of record work before the family historian stood up at a reunion in 1912 and announced that he had found the link beyond a doubt. The man who cracked it was Samuel Glattfelter, the same Sam who had helped organize the very first reunion 6 years earlier. And nailing down the CLOD Felter connection became one of the proudest achievements of his long work on the family. The CLOD Felters were the descendants of Casper's brother, John Peter, whose widow and children had crossed in 1743. The branch that had wandered off into the south 2 centuries earlier was traced at last back to the same household. That whole reunion is a story for a later season. What matters now is where it begins, which is here, with John Peter dead at the border and Salomea deciding to cross anyway. There is a hard and useful truth in John Peter's life, and it has nothing to do with winning. He failed at the one thing he set out to do. He wanted to bring his family to America, and he died before he managed a single mile of open water. By the only measure he would have used on himself, he did not make it. And yet there are thousands of people alive today, CLOD Felters and Sayalot Felters, across the South and well beyond it, who exist because of a journey John Peter planned and never took. The dream outlived the dreamer. The plan he died with became the life his children lived. Most of us will start things we never get to finish. We plant trees whose shade we will not sit in, set plans moving that come due after we are gone, point a family or a piece of work in a direction and then run out of road before it arrives. John Peter Glattfelder is this family's patron of that quiet, common fate. He went first, which meant he carried the risk and collected none of the reward. He died at the threshold, and the people who loved him carried what he had started the rest of the way. The least his descendants owe him, the Glattfelders and the Clodfelters alike, is to know his name and to remember that they are the destination he never reached.
If these stories mean something to you, share them with your family and invite them to subscribe. It's free at glattfelder.news/subscribe. Whatever your last name is today, Glattfelder, Glattfelter, C.L. Oddfelter, Gladfelter. This is where the family sits down and talks to itself about where it came from. Speak the names again.